A father's quiet drive home turns into a shocking public showdown when a cop's accusations spiral out of control. But what one brave teacher did next changed everything. Derek Reynolds tightened his grip on the steering wheel, glancing at the neatly wrapped gift bag on the passenger seat. Inside was a delicate bracelet for his daughter, Kira. She'd turn 9 tomorrow, and he could already picture the joy in her eyes when she opened it. The day had been long, his shift at the factory running overtime, but the thought of seeing her smile made every second worth it. The sun was setting over the quiet streets of Westfield, Indiana, casting a warm golden hue over the rows of modest homes. As Derek made a turn onto Willow Lane, a pair of red and blue lights flashed in his rearview mirror, accompanied by the sharp wail of a siren. His chest tightened. He wasn't speeding. His taillights were working, and his tags were current. Instinctively, he slowed to a stop on the side of the road, his mind racing. He rolled down his window as the officer approached, a white man in his 40s, with a hardened expression and a hand resting on his belt. Derek kept his hands visible on the wheel, his voice steady as he greeted, "Good evening, officer. Is there a problem?" The officer peered into the car, his eyes narrowing. "License and registration," he barked. Derek complied without hesitation, passing the documents over. The officer lingered, studying Derek's face as if searching for something. "Where are you headed?" the officer asked, his tone sharp, almost accusatory. Derek hesitated. "Just heading home, sir. Picking up a gift for my daughter." The officer's lips curled slightly, but there was no friendliness in the gesture. "Step out of the car," he ordered abruptly. But the moment Derek opened the door, he realized this was far from a routine traffic stop. Derek paused, his heart pounding in his chest. He glanced at the officer, trying to read his expression, but the man's face was a mask of authority. Slowly, Derek stepped out of the car, careful to keep his hands in plain sight. He'd taught Kira about moments like this, not to be fearful, but to be cautious. Now, the lessons he'd hoped she'd never need were replaying in his mind. The officer motioned toward the curb. "Stand over there," he commanded, his tone leaving no room for debate. Derek complied, standing in the cool evening air as the officer began circling the car, his flashlight cutting through the dim interior. Derek could see neighbors peeking through their blinds, the occasional shadow moving behind curtains. "What's going on, officer?" Derek asked, keeping his voice calm but firm. "I wasn't speeding, and everything's in order." The officer stopped and turned, his eyes narrowing. "You look suspicious," he said bluntly. "We've had reports of break-ins around here." Derek's stomach sank. He'd heard those words before, not directed at him, but at others like him. He'd watched videos, read stories, always the same script, different faces. "With all due respect, sir, I've done nothing wrong," he said, holding his ground. The officer ignored him and leaned into the car, pulling out the gift bag. He opened it, inspecting the contents as if it were contraband. Derek's jaw clenched, but he stayed silent. A small group of onlookers had begun to gather, some holding their phones up to record. He noticed one man muttering to someone beside him, their faces a mixture of confusion and unease. "Is this necessary?" Derek asked again, louder this time, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. "Keep quiet," the officer snapped, pointing a finger at him. "Let me do my job." But the officer's actions weren't just drawing attention, they were igniting something deeper in the growing crowd. The tension in the air was palpable, each second stretching into what felt like hours. Derek stood his ground on the curb, his pulse racing as the officer continued rummaging through his car. The gift bag now lay discarded on the passenger seat, its delicate bow undone, exposing the bracelet meant for Kira. Derek's mind flashed to his daughter, imagining her waiting at home, wondering why Daddy hadn't returned yet. The officer slammed the car door shut and turned back to Derek, his flashlight beam pointed directly at his face. "What are you really doing here?" he demanded, his voice sharp and accusing. "I told you," Derek replied evenly, refusing to let his voice waver. "I was buying a gift for my daughter, that's all." The officer took a step closer, the space between them shrinking. "You're telling me you just happened to be driving through this neighborhood at this time of night? Seems awfully convenient." Derek took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the crowd's gaze on his back. He could see them now, a mix of curiosity, concern, and disbelief etched on their faces. A woman whispered to her friend, gesturing toward the officer, while another man muttered, "This doesn't look right." "I live 5 minutes from here," Derek said firmly, his eyes meeting the officer's. "Check my license. Everything you need is there." But the officer didn't move. Instead, he placed a hand on his hip, his fingers brushing the holster of his gun. Derek's stomach turned as he realized how quickly this could escalate further. He raised his hands slightly, palms facing outward, a gesture of submission that felt both humiliating and necessary. "Don't move," the officer barked, though Derek hadn't taken a step. The murmurs from the crowd grew louder, their unease transforming into anger. A young woman holding her phone called out, "This is wrong. He's not doing anything." Her voice carried over the scene, breaking the officer's focus for a split second. "Stay back," the officer shouted, turning toward the growing audience. His voice was commanding, but the cracks in his confidence were beginning to show. The cameras were still rolling, their silent lenses capturing every word, every action. But just as the officer turned back to Derek, someone from the crowd stepped forward, changing the course of the night. From the edge of the crowd, a voice cut through the growing tension, clear and unwavering. "Officer, I know this man." Heads turned toward the source as a woman in her early 40s stepped forward. Her presence carried a quiet authority, her voice calm but firm. She was dressed in a cardigan and jeans, her work badge still clipped to her hip, a teacher from the local middle school, well known and respected in the community. The officer hesitated, his hand dropping slightly from his hip. "Ma'am, stay back," he said, but there was less bite in his tone now. "I'm not interfering," she replied, stopping a few feet from the scene. "I just want to make it clear that this man, Derek Reynolds, is a parent of one of my students. He's not a threat. He's a good man." The crowd buzzed with whispers, and Derek turned his head slightly toward her. He recognized her now, Ms. Linda Palmer, one of Kyra's favorite teachers. She'd spoken highly of Ms. Palmer's fairness and compassion, and now here she was, standing up for him. The officer stiffened, his authority challenged. "This doesn't concern you, ma'am," he said, though his voice betrayed a flicker of uncertainty. "It concerns all of us," she said, her gaze unwavering. "This is our neighborhood. I know who belongs here, and I know he does." Her words landed like a hammer, resonating with the crowd. More voices joined in, calling for the officer to back down. "He's done nothing wrong," one man shouted. A younger woman added, "We're all watching, officer." The officer looked around, visibly rattled. The once quiet street now brimmed with eyes and phones trained on him. Ms. Palmer stepped closer to Derek, standing just a few feet away. "If there's no evidence of a crime, I think it's time to let him go," she said firmly. Derek felt a surge of gratitude but kept his expression calm. His voice was steady as he said, "Thank you, Ms. Palmer." But the officer wasn't ready to back down, not yet. His pride and authority were on the line, and he made one last attempt to regain control of the situation. The officer's face hardened, his jaw tightening as he scanned the crowd. The pressure was mounting, the weight of dozens of eyes bearing down on him. He turned back to Derek and Ms. Palmer, his voice sharp but shaky. "Step back, ma'am, or I'll have to detain you for interfering with police work." The crowd erupted in protest, their voices growing louder. "Detain her for what?" someone yelled. "This is harassment," another added. Ms. Palmer didn't flinch. "I'm not interfering," she said calmly. "I'm standing here as a witness, and so is everyone else." She gestured toward the crowd, now swelling in size as more neighbors stepped out of their homes to see what was happening. The officer's hand hovered near his radio, his options dwindling. He glanced at Derek one more time, as if hoping for some justification to continue. But Derek stood tall, his hands still raised, his composure unshaken. "I've complied with everything you asked, officer," he said. "You've searched my car. You've seen my license. What more do you need?" It was a question that hung in the air, the kind of question that couldn't be answered without admitting the truth. The officer hesitated, his eyes darting between Derek, Ms. Palmer, and the onlookers. The phones recording him seemed to multiply by the second, each one a silent witness to his actions. Finally, with a visible exhale, he stepped back. "You're free to go," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the crowd's murmurs. He turned and walked briskly to his patrol car, his shoulders tense, his pride clearly bruised. The tension in the air didn't dissipate immediately. Derek lowered his hands slowly, exhaling a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Ms. Palmer turned to him, her expression softening. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I will be," he replied, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "Thanks to you." The crowd erupted in applause, some shouting words of support and encouragement. Derek felt a mix of relief and disbelief. For a moment, he simply stood there, letting the reality of the situation sink in. But the night wasn't over yet. What had just unfolded would ripple through the community in ways no one could have anticipated. As the officer drove away, the energy among the crowd shifted. Relief mingled with anger, and voices rose in impassioned discussion. Some shook their heads in disbelief, while others spoke about their own encounters with similar situations. The shared frustration created a sense of solidarity, an unspoken agreement that this wasn't just Derek's fight, it was everyone's. Ms. Palmer stayed by Derek's side, her presence steady and reassuring. "You shouldn't have had to go through that," she said quietly, her voice tinged with both anger and sorrow. Derek nodded, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for the discarded gift bag in the car. "I'm just glad Kyra wasn't here to see this," he said. "I don't want her growing up thinking this is normal." A young man in the crowd stepped forward, holding up his phone. "I've got everything on video," he said. "We need to make this public. People need to see what happened here tonight." Others chimed in, agreeing. Some neighbors exchanged contact information, determined to come together and take action. Conversations about police accountability, systemic issues, and the need for change filled the air. The moment had sparked something larger than anyone expected. Ms. Palmer spoke up, her voice calm but firm. "We need to do more than just post this online. Let's organize. This community deserves better, and so does Derek." Her words struck a chord, and nods of agreement rippled through the group. Derek felt a surge of gratitude as he looked around at the faces of his neighbors, strangers who had stepped up to support him in a moment of vulnerability. But there was also a lingering frustration, a question that hung heavy in his mind. Why did it take so much? Why did it take a crowd, a camera, and a brave witness to keep him safe? As the crowd began to disperse, Derek turned to Ms. Palmer. "Thank you for stepping in," he said. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't." She smiled softly. "We're all part of this community, Derek. If we don't stand up for each other, who will?" But the real impact of that night wouldn't fully reveal itself until the days and weeks that followed. In the days following the incident, the video captured that night spread quickly across social media. News outlets picked it up, framing the story as both a glaring example of police overreach and a testament to the power of community action. Derek's face was everywhere, his calm demeanor under pressure becoming a symbol of resilience. But for Derek, the experience wasn't about becoming a symbol. It was about protecting his family and ensuring Kyra could grow up in a world where her father didn't have to fear moments like this. Sitting at the kitchen table one evening, he explained the situation to her in terms she could understand. "Sometimes people make bad decisions because they don't take the time to see who someone really is," he said. "But we always have to stand up for what's right, no matter how hard it is." Kyra listened intently, her small hands resting on the bracelet he'd given her. "But you were brave, Daddy," she said, "and the lady helped you." Derek nodded, his heart swelling with pride. "She did. And now it's up to us to help others too." Meanwhile, the community came together in ways Derek hadn't expected. Meetings were organized, with neighbors discussing how to address systemic issues while building a stronger, more inclusive neighborhood. Ms. Palmer led the charge, proposing programs to educate both residents and local authorities on bias and equity. "Change doesn't happen overnight," she said at one meeting, "but it starts when we refuse to look the other way." The police department, facing public scrutiny, launched an internal review of the officers' actions. While Derek didn't hold his breath for justice, he appreciated the fact that the conversation was happening. It was a small step, but an important one. For Derek, the most significant outcome was the connections forged that night. Neighbors who'd once been strangers now waved as he passed by, some stopping to chat about their shared vision for the future. Kira had new friends from families she hadn't known before, and Derek felt a cautious hope for the first time in a long while. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Derek stood in his backyard, watching Kira play. Ms. Palmer stopped by, carrying a small box of homemade cookies. "I thought you might like these," she said with a warm smile. "Thank you," Derek said, accepting the box. He hesitated for a moment before adding, "You didn't just help me that night. You reminded me that we're not alone." Ms. Palmer nodded, her expression thoughtful. "None of us are. Sometimes it just takes a moment like that to show us how connected we really are." And in that moment, Derek realized that even in the face of injustice, there was power in unity, in speaking up, and in believing that change, however slow, was always possible. This story isn't just about one man's experience, it's about the importance of standing together against injustice. If this message resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that spark conversation and inspire action.